Welcome to the Saturday Cadence podcast. I'm Blake Biscardi, and remember, the Saturday Cadence podcast is the heartbeat of college football. October is here in the college football season, which means contenders or pretenders. We're going to evaluate some of the top teams as we head into the month of October. Welcome into Saturday Cadence. My name is Blake Biscardi. I've got David Wertheim and Grant Kincaid alongside today. Great show for you. Week 6 of the college football season. Hard to believe that it's already here. James Franklin and Penn State took a big loss to Oregon last week. Kalen DeBoer in Alabama picked up a big win as Kirby Smart falls to 1-7 against the Crimson Tide. We're going to lead the show with a little bit of thoughts on them and then parlay this right into our contenders pretenders talk. David, your thoughts here on James Franklin and Penn State, and then Kalen DeBoer and Alabama as they're now resurging right back into this national conversation.
Well, James Franklin and Penn State is just more of the same. And, it's like the movie Groundhog Day. Like you wake up and then here you go again. It's James Franklin losing to a top 10 team. So definitely disappointing in that regard. Their offense was shut down most of the game. Had a nice little comeback there in the fourth quarter, but ultimately same old stuff dooms them in overtime. Drew Aller throws a pick, and that's the end of that. James Franklin loses again to another top 10 team. And I think I kind of predicted this one. I was wrong about Alabama, Georgia, but I got this one right. Dan Lanning was just a little bit more prepared, and ultimately Oregon on the road and the whiteout was able to defeat Penn State. And, before the season, a lot of people talked about how Penn State was trying to run it back like Ohio State, Ohio State 2024, where they bring back all their elite players. They have elite coaches to supplement that. They're old, experienced. And Penn State was looking that way as well on paper. But the difference is that they just didn't have as good of players as Ohio State has. And ultimately, I think that's going to be their downfall, just like every other year. Their players just aren't good enough to be a top 5 team, and James Franklin isn't good enough to be a top 5 coach. I think they're a top 10 team with a top 10 roster and a top 10 coach, but that's just who they are at this point. So wasn't really surprised by that result. And then Alabama, I was surprised going on the road and beating Georgia, snapping that winning streak for Georgia at home. And that was impressive. Blake, you kind of called this one saying that the struggles that Kirby Smart has had with Alabama. And I kind of pushed back on that, saying that it was a Nick Saban problem, not an Alabama problem. And it appears I've been wrong because they've been stymied. And, giving up 24 points in the first half isn't a very good look. Ultimately, Georgia's defense kind of recovered there in the second half, but they weren't able to do enough, and Alabama managed the game. So good for the Crimson Tide. They'll play Vanderbilt this week. We'll talk about that later, but really good win on the road against Georgia, kind of following up their momentum that they've had for a couple weeks now.
With Alabama, like I said, just exploiting the back end of that Georgia defense, and that's exactly what happened in the first half. But they did recover, and you saw some signs from both teams where they're still going to be in that conversation in the SEC. They're still going to be in the conversation for the college football playoff. But like Alabama had to do after the loss to Florida State, they had to clean some things up. And I think that's where Georgia's at right now. They're not a bad team. They just have some things they need to clean up, tighten up a little bit, and prepare for this run here through October and into November. And David, before I go to Grant on this, like we're talking about contenders or pretenders, we now have a month's worth of data of these teams. We're heading into week 6. Penn State and Alabama. Do you label them a contender or a pretender?
I think Alabama is closer to a contender than Penn State is right now. I think if those two teams played tomorrow, I'd probably take Alabama over Penn State. So I think Alabama's a little closer. I was thinking about this earlier, and I really don't think there's any like bona fide contenders right now, other than maybe Ohio State. Every other team that we've seen has had some sort of flaw, has dropped a game. And I think that ultimately right now where we're at, it's just the state of college football that there aren't these, dominant elite teams. And with a 12-team playoff, there's just a lot more contenders literally on paper than there have been in years past. I think for the sake of the argument, Alabama is closer. I would take them on a neutral field right now. And I don't think Penn State is very close. I think they're kind of in the same bubble they were, where they could get in the playoff and win a game, but that's probably their ceiling.
Grant, let me look to you here. David's talking about there's not really a bona fide contender beside potentially the Buckeyes. I have grouped on the sheet Ohio State, Oregon, and Miami. They're clearly the three best teams in the country through the first month. To me, I see them with the contender label on from the data that we've seen. Now, we can project later into the season, and maybe that's what David's doing. Maybe that's what he's not. He'll speak to it in a second. But for Ohio State, Oregon, and Miami as a cluster, as the top three teams in the country, are you comfortable labeling them all as contenders? Or are there parts of each of these teams or any of these teams that you need to see before you hand out that label?
I know I do think those are the teams right now that, when you look at them, they stand out the most. There have been, small hiccups, like Dave said. Ohio State's the only team that's, they've definitely showed the least amount of hiccups, and they've showed the least amount of weakness. Against Texas, maybe you could say that their offense got off to a slow start, but that's the first game of the season against a really good Texas team, and their defense more than made up for it. But Oregon and Miami are teams that have taken care of business, and Oregon right now is probably fresh in a lot of people's minds as, yeah, Penn State doesn't win those games. But this is, we can agree, probably one of the best Penn State teams overall we've seen in a very long time. And Oregon went into Penn State and they took care of business. So, I think if there's a team that's closest to Ohio State right now, it's them, especially with, kind of the pedigree of Lanning, bringing Oregon to the, playoff contention, year after year lately. And then with Miami, we just haven't seen enough from Miami in a long time to put them ahead of either of those teams. But they have proven themselves to be that number three team, and I think they're probably the one team that you're probably saying pretender at this point. But anything can happen.
David, looking at these three teams, how I would evaluate Ohio State is, yeah, you can have the defending national champions. And if you look at polls that way, that's fine. But I think Ohio State has proven on the field that they don't need that defending national champions to earn that number one ranking so far this season with the win over Texas and then going into Husky Stadium and really stifling a high powered Washington offense with arguably one of the best trios in the country, is how they've been marketed. It's a high octane offense out there with Jed Fish scoring over 55 points a game. Outside of the matchup against the Buckeyes, you have Damon Williams and Denzel Boston and Jonah Coleman. Those three players, you didn't really hear much about them during the game on Saturday, and Ohio State's defense did a great job taking them away. And Matt Patricia has this unit elevated from a year ago, which is really hard to even think about with how good it was under Jim Knowles, with all the veterans that were in that group last year. Caden Curry on the defensive line has really come on strong. And if you're not talking about Caleb Downs, Sonny Styles, and Arvell Reese, you're missing the point on this defense, because those three guys have been playing at an elite level for the Buckeyes through the first month, and that only seems to improve. So a lot of confidence in the Buckeye defense, only giving up 5.5 points a game through four. And you see Oregon going on the road to Penn State and, again, just stymieing that offense for three quarters. And then, you know what? They got hit in the mouth and they battled back and they got out of there with a victory. They made the plays late when they needed to. And that's the sign of a good team. And Miami, we saw them beat Florida. We saw them beat USF. We saw them beat Notre Dame. How good are all those teams? We still have to find out, because they all need to grow as the season wears on. But a big opportunity ahead going into Doak Campbell Stadium on Saturday night against Florida State. So we're going to learn a lot about Miami, because I do think the Noles are the best team that Miami will have played so far in their season. I label all three of these teams as contenders. I do think they're all going to be in the college football playoff, whether that's with an undefeated record, 1 or 2 losses. I think that all three of these teams are contenders for the reasons that I just mentioned. Carson Beck playing well for the Canes. How do you evaluate the Buckeyes, Ducks, and Hurricanes?
I agree. I think all three are contenders for sure. I'll start with Oregon, just kind of finishing up that Penn State conversation. And you're right, they made the plays when they needed to make them. They're experienced in the right spots. Dante Moore has looked at every bit like his 5-star pedigree so far. He's been really good. And yeah, Oregon is very strong again. They did almost blow it there at the end. But ultimately, they were able to escape with the win and made a big play there at the end of the game. So, yeah, Oregon for sure, bona fide contender. Miami as well. I think they're really strong. Every year it seems like okay, this is the week that Miami wheels fall off, and this is the week that Miami wheels fall off, and so on and so on, and eventually the wheels fall off. But I don't really see that with this team. They're kind of similar. They're old in the right spots. Carson Beck, that marriage looks really good so far. Their defense is strong. Ruben Bain has been awesome. So I think Miami is really good. And yeah, this game against Florida State is going to be a lot of fun. And then it's kind of just business as usual for Ohio State, just doing what they always do, and that's winning football games. They beat Texas, obviously first game of the year. That was the most hyped matchup opener of all time. And then after the game, it suddenly changed to, oh, well, Texas, they aren't really that good. So Ohio State is just doing what they're doing. We saw it again against Washington, really controlled the second half. And for not a few mental errors in the first half, a stop on fourth down for Washington in the red zone, and then Brandon Inniss punt return on a fumble deep in Washington territory. That game looks a lot different. Ohio State probably wins by 40 and shuts down the vaunted Washington offense, holding them out of the end zone. I mean, that game was, Ohio State kind of just throttled them really. So they're just doing what they've always done. That's winning football games, and I expect that to continue. So I think, yeah, all three of these teams are contenders for sure.
Dave, look at a team like Georgia. Going into Neyland Stadium, they gave up 40 points, but they found a way to win the game on the road with a young group and a first-time starting quarterback. So I gave them a lot of credit for that victory. I still think that win holds a lot of weight. They bring in Alabama to their own building, and we see that they still have the Alabama problem. When you look at a team like Georgia with Kirby Smart and Gunnar Stockton at quarterback, the wide receivers look a lot better than a year ago, although we saw some of those drops that we were talking about that hadn't happened yet kind of resurface in that Alabama game. Both teams actually had some really key drops, although Alabama didn't have to pay so much for their mistakes as Georgia did. Do you label the Dogs as a contender, or are they closer to a pretender right now? I'm not sure about that defense on the backside. Yes, did they clean it up in the second half like you said? They did. I just don't know if this is the same Georgia team that we're used to seeing from 2021 and 22 and even 2023.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's hard to be at those levels. Those were dynastic level teams, and two of them ultimately won the college football playoff. And then last year kind of took a step back, lost three games for the first time in a while since 2018. And I think for Georgia, ultimately they are who they are, and that is a team that likes to run the football and plays defense. That's when they're their best. Um, and this year it's been a bit more of a struggle to do that on both sides. And it'll be a struggle for them. I do like their schedule the rest of the way. There's not a ton there. They get Ole Miss at home, they get Florida at home, they get Texas at home, they get Georgia Tech at home. So if they can defend home turf, which they weren't able to do against Alabama, then they'll be in good shape. Um, but ultimately, they are who they are, and that's running the football and playing good defense. So I still view them as a contender for now. I would kind of put them as a bubble team, but I definitely think they have an opportunity here to go on a run and make a playoff for sure.
Grant, how about a team like Ole Miss with Lane Kiffin, Trinidad Chambliss? They got a big win over LSU. They've looked pretty good to start the season. The defense looks all right, but the offense, I think, is going to be where the ceiling is for Ole Miss. If they can continue to score points and play good defense, there's not a ton on Ole Miss's schedule if they can capitalize on their opportunities like they just did for the first time this weekend, beating LSU. How do you evaluate a team like Ole Miss? Are they a contender to you, or do you think we're still in wait and see mode with the Rebels?
Because of obviously LSU was a big win for Ole Miss, but kind of going through the degrees of separation, you have an LSU team whose marquee wins are Clemson and Florida, and we've seen what both of those teams have done this year. So I think you're just in a little bit more of the wait and see mode. Although I will say, Lane Kiffin has done a great, yet another great coaching job at Ole Miss so far. And Chambliss is a great quarterback, but he's obviously had to change plans throughout the season at the quarterback positions. So Lane Kiffin is always finding a way to elevate the quarterback position, and as a result, the offense. But like you said, their schedule, it's gonna lend itself to them becoming a contender. their next game's at home against Washington State, and they're going to have, chances to make statements, in conference and stay in this race in the SEC that, as we're talking about right now, there's teams like Georgia that we aren't sure about. So, right now they are in it, but, wait and see.
David, let's go to Texas A&M with Marcel Reed and Mike Elko. They've got some big wins, but Texas A&M schedule pretty manageable the rest of the way. That game with Texas could be again for a trip to Atlanta on the line, just like it was a year ago. Do you think the Aggies are a real contender? Because I think, to me, I lean more contender than pretender when I see what they've already done, when I look ahead at what's on their schedule. And yeah, I'm projecting a little bit. I do think Texas A&M is more of a playoff team than not as it stands right now.
I'm going to disagree with you here. Obviously, winning that game at Notre Dame was good and fun, and but ultimately they allowed 40 points. Their defense hasn't been great all year. They beat a pretty bad Auburn offense at home last week. And their Notre Dame win is a good win. Don't get me wrong, but Notre Dame is 2-2 currently. We'll see how they end up. I will say I think their schedule again. It's a relatively favorable one. Next three games: Mississippi State, Florida, at Arkansas. If you can get through that, that sets up a matchup with LSU and then Missouri. So they have an opportunity here. We'll learn one way or the other. But I think that game against Missouri is really going to tell us a lot about both of those teams. They're early in November. I think we'll know a lot more right around then. Because I'm interested in both of those teams, honestly. I think they're kind of both in the same spot, same level for me. They've both been pretty good, but not great the last couple of years. Um, so I'm really excited for that game coming up in a few weeks.
Yeah, it's definitely an opportunity for both of those teams to take a step forward. And whoever does is going to be in a really good position for the college football playoff as maybe an at-large team or potentially even a spot in the SEC championship game. So we'll see as the season goes on, but that's a big opportunity ahead for both of those schools and programs. Let's transition to a little bit of week 6 talk here. We've got two big games we want to highlight, then one on the upset alert board. Miami at Florida State. Grant, I'm going to go to you first with this one. Carson Beck and Miami have their first road game, even though they're not leaving the state of Florida. So they're heading to Tallahassee, Doak Campbell Stadium for a night game. When this stadium came alive against Alabama, it was giving you the shades of old. It was like the 90s again. It was like those years with Jameis Winston where that place was absolutely buzzing. It was electric. You felt it. I think that's going to be the atmosphere that we get. It's going to be raucous for Miami coming in there. But you have a veteran quarterback. You have Carson Beck. They need to score early, I think, to be okay. If they have a turnover or if Florida State gets up a score and that crowd stays in it, they've got to find a way to neutralize that crowd early in the game, because I do think that it's going to play a factor in that home field. It's a rivalry game, and Florida State's back this year. They're back in the national scene. They're back relevant, and Miami is trying to stay there. David said it earlier in the show. We're waiting for the wheels to fall off for Miami because that's what we're used to over the last couple of seasons, not really doing a ton of nationally relevant things or winning big games since that national championship way back in 2001. They've only been up and down here and there. This is their best chance, I think, to return to that kind of prominence. So what's at stake in this game if you're Miami coming into that matchup, Grant?
If you're Miami, it's like what you said. It's Miami sustaining what we've assumed that they were going to fumble, and that is the chance at a top 4, top 2 ranking and a chance at the national championship. And that's something that Miami hasn't had the chance to do because of, this back half of the season, this conference portion of the season for them where the wheels do come off. They do have, like you said, they have Carson Beck now, and he seems like someone who's found a second win down there in Miami, and he's really thriving. And I think it's boding well for them, especially because he's had the experience. He's been on the road in huge games in the SEC. But like you said, this is a different Florida State team. This is a different Florida State fan base and crowd this year. It's nothing like last year. You can erase last year. This is a whole different vibe and team. And obviously with Castellanos, it's a whole different kind of animal for you to stop if you're Miami, especially if you have your backs up against the wall, like you said early in the game, and you can't get the crowd off your own back. So it's going to be really fun to see, which which team really, or, because Florida State, they already have that loss to UVA, and UVA, as of now, is a team that's contending for the ACC. And I know we can get to that later, but Florida State has a lot riding on this game, and they're at home, and they're going to be ready to feast on anything.
David, talk about your perspective on this matchup for both of these teams. Tommy Castellanos has been a great transfer quarterback. He's super dynamic with the football, but he had some turnover issues against Virginia. We saw that Friday night as they pulled the upset. He can't have that happen. He's got to play like he did against Alabama, where he takes over the game. And sure, he doesn't have to be their full offense, but he has to be able to be accurate with his arm, make the right throws, convert in the red zone, and be effective with his legs, because that's the great equalizer. And that is what makes him and the Florida State offense so dynamic. What are your thoughts here on Miami and Florida State? And just looking at this from the Florida State perspective, it's a big spot for Mike Norvell and really the biggest game ahead for Tommy Castellanos.
Yeah, huge game, in-state game. And, I agree with what you said about the turnovers. This feels like it's going to be a tight game, just, one of those feelings that you get. Um, and I think it will be. And I think that, in those tight games, you can't turn the ball over. So that's definitely going to be a point of emphasis this week, I would think, for Florida State and their staff. Huge for Mike Norvell, for sure. After last year, getting some momentum back, beating Alabama. But then, early ACC play falling to Virginia is really tough. So chance to get right this week, chance to hand Miami its first loss. And for the Hurricanes, a chance to keep it rolling. They've had a really nice start to the year. And ultimately they have come so close, but fallen short so many times. Like we've said in the show multiple times already, you just wait for the wheels to fall off. They haven't yet. I think this is an opportunity for them to kind of establish themselves to the national fans that, hey, like we're here to stay.
What really impressed me in the game against Alabama for Florida State was the way they were able to control the line of scrimmage. They did it on both sides of the football. The defense played fast, they were downhill, and the offense was executing. So I think, again, if Florida State can do those things, I've been just as impressed with Miami's defense too. David, you said it, they're old in the right places, and they look physical and they look fast. They have a decisive quarterback in Carson Beck, Mark Fletcher at running back. I mean, this game is really going to remind the younger fans of what this rivalry truly is, what it used to be, and hopefully what it's going to continue to be, as both of these programs can hopefully stay at this level, because it's better for college football when this game is good, when this game matters to the magnitude that it does. So this is a huge game this week in Tallahassee, and I cannot wait to take this one in on Saturday night. But elsewhere in the SEC, Vanderbilt is taking on Alabama. Lots of things going on in this matchup if you're Alabama. From last year, you're kind of having some nightmares this week. Hey, we just beat Georgia. Now we got to play Vandy. This time it's at home. They lost there a year ago, and probably one of the bigger stunners in college football. Yeah, Diego Pavia and Vanderbilt played well, and they were great on third down last year. And Vanderbilt wasn't bad. Vanderbilt is an improved team. Just though, Alabama and Vanderbilt, when you see those two programs on paper, you think football and baseball. You don't think football and football. And Vanderbilt has made this a discussion where it's now football and football. And they look good this year so far. David, do you think that there's any chance of a repeat for next year? Do you think this is a game where Alabama's in that revenge spot? They're coming off of the emotional win on the road, this trap game area. What's the mindset like for Alabama this week heading into this matchup?
I like Alabama here. I think this is a game where they can kind of keep their momentum going as well. I think that'll be stressed this week. And, I think that ultimately they have more talent here. I think they're motivated from last year. Game day was just pretty exciting. Vanderbilt and Alabama, you didn't think you'd get game day there, but you got it. So no, I think this would be a great game. I'm really excited. But I think Alabama wins here. And ultimately, I think they cover. I think they have a strong second half. And I'm actually feeling good about the Alabama pick here.
Grant, talk to me about Vanderbilt's side coming into this matchup. Diego Pavia's kind of called his shot a couple of times. We know he had a lot of magic last year, but Vanderbilt is a team that you have to say it's not, oh, it's Vanderbilt. No, you're playing a good football team. Talk to me about the Vanderbilt side and mentality coming into this spot.
Yeah, you're right. It's a totally different, mindset when you play Vanderbilt. the past 2 years, and it's mostly because of the name you just said with Diego Pavia. He's a guy that he changes the whole dynamic of that, not just offense, but that team, and he's been the engine of that team. And you know, as cocky as they may seem, they do have a chance against pretty much anyone when he's on the field. And when Vanderbilt's at full health, it's just how it's been lately. We've seen Vanderbilt go on the road and just eviscerate a really good South Carolina team. Not great, but a team that we know is talented, and they've won games convincingly that we just don't see Vanderbilt do multiple years in a row. And I think this is the chance for Vanderbilt to say, yeah, last year we pulled off the crazy upset at home, but we can come into your place and we can play the same game and we can win the same game. So I think if you're Pavia, you have to think that way and convince everyone else the same thing because, I mean, technically they really could do the same thing.
Because they did it last year. You have empirical evidence. The data says Vanderbilt won the game last year. So it's not, hey, guys, this is in the hypotheticals. What if we do this? It is, hey, this happened last year. This can be our game, and we can do this again. What says we can't? Because we already did. So let's keep it rolling. So I'm intrigued by this matchup. I think this is going to be pretty fun. But David, I want to look at the upset board real quick. Texas at Florida. Preseason, we thought this game was going to be nuts, and it still might be. We thought Florida was going to be in contention a lot more than they are and look way better with DJ Lagway and that defense. And we thought Texas would probably be about where Texas is. So they've not really let anybody down. Their offense has just maybe not looked as high octane as we thought that it would. Still a big matchup there, though. This is a spread that's inside of 7. Do you think that there's any place here where the Gators can win this game at home?
Well, I mean, sure. I still think Florida's pretty talented. I mean, obviously, it hasn't worked out the way they hoped. DJ Lagway's been a mess, and Billy Napier is still on the hot seat. But ultimately, Billy Napier still has his job, and I think there's a chance that Florida in the swamp. I've seen crazy things happen. They absolutely have a chance. Now, with that said, I think Texas wins this game, but I do think it'll be a little uncomfortable, and I think Texas is going to have to work for it. Coming off of their best performance of the year, albeit against Sam Houston State. But so we'll see. We'll see. I think Florida's got a chance. I think the spread reflects that with them being within a touchdown. They certainly have a chance at home. So, I think Texas wins, but I think Florida can certainly make it a game.
Yeah, this is one of those matchups you get a little bit concerned for Texas because what you've seen on film from Florida, is not their ceiling. So will they play 7 or 14 points better than what the film says? That's the trap for Texas this week is if Florida's able to do that, they're going to have a really good ball game on their hands, potentially even losing because it is really tough to play in the swamp, especially later in the day. Let's move into the final segment here for our Saturday 7 picks. First game on the board, Virginia pulls a big upset against Florida State last week. They're heading to Louisville this week. The Cardinals are favored by 6.5. So though they're unranked and Virginia is ranked, Louisville still favored by 6.5. David, then Grant, what's your pick in this matchup?
We're going to take Louisville here. I think that they're a team that, obviously with Jeff Brom, they're pretty explosive on offense. And, I think ultimately that's going to be the difference here. I feel like they can hang with Virginia offensively. I feel like at home it gives them a better chance. So give me the Cards here. I like the spread, so I'm going to take them outright.
Louisville has been a little bit of a surprise, and I think it's reflected in that spread there. So I'm gonna go with Louisville too at home. UVA has worked a little bit of magic, but I don't think they're gonna be able to sustain it.
Virginia put a lot into that upset last week. This is that emotional place for them. The mark of Virginia is going to be decided in this game this year or this week. If they're able to go into Louisville and put back-to-back weeks together where they win that game, David, you have said it the last couple of weeks, a good team finds a way to win the game. And though they're a touchdown underdog just about on the road, a good team is going to be in this game, and a great team could find a way to win the game. So if Virginia pulls this off and wins, I think you're going to label Virginia as a team that's in the ACC championship game mix, not because there's a 0 in the loss column in conference, but because they have some wins to prove that medal that's there. All of that being said, I do like Louisville in the matchup, and I think they win the game. I would like to be proven wrong by Virginia, so they're another team to add to the mix in the ACC. I just don't see it right now, but I could be proven wrong. So I'll take Louisville as well to win and to cover. Mississippi State at Texas A&M. The Aggies are favored by 14 and a half at home. Mississippi State almost pulled a big upset last week at Tennessee. They've been playing really, really good football. Jeff Lebby and the boys, if you don't know about them, learn about them because they're playing good football. Mississippi State on the road at Texas A&M, 14 and a half point spread. David, who do you like?
I like Texas A&M here, home field advantage again. I think ultimately they just have a little bit more. It was a nice effort last week by Mississippi State, but I just don't think they're there yet. I like Texas A&M.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go A&M as well, and I think sitting at that 14 and a half, it's kind of a little, that's an interesting line, but Texas A&M is, and I think they're still good enough to cover that right now against Mississippi State. Mississippi State looks obviously way better than losing to Toledo at home, but they just aren't there yet.
I like Texas A&M to win the game. I like Mississippi State to cover. I think they're playing good football, and that 14 and a half is a lot. Even though it's at home in a night game, I think Mississippi State can keep it within that number. That hook gives me a little extra confidence there. Clemson at North Carolina. The Tigers are favored by 13 and a half, and this might be the disappointing bowl because Clemson has not met expectations. We didn't know what North Carolina was going to look like under Bill Belichick, but it has been wildly disappointing so far. David, who do you like in this one between the Tigers and the Tar Heels? Again, spreads 13 and a half in favor of Clemson.
I like Clemson here. I think North Carolina's awful, and it's a shame. So I'm going to take Clemson.
Yeah, I think Clemson's gonna come in there and, you know, as much as a program game that they can have right now with the season that they're having, they're gonna have against North Carolina. They're just head and shoulders in so many ways more organized and talented than North Carolina right now. So, it is kind of a shame, but Clemson should be able to cover that 13 and a half.
I like Clemson in the game too. I think they win the game, and I think they win it big. This is a tricky one here. Iowa State ranked 14 in the country at Cincinnati. If you guys had to guess who's favored, you probably think it's Iowa State. It is not. The Bearcats are favored by a point and a half. Very interesting line here. David, who do you like in this one?
It's funny. Obviously, I'm from Cincinnati, and I was talking to a coworker today about this game, and he kind of thought it was a similar funky spread, but I don't think it is. I think UC hung in there last week and ultimately got a really nice win on the road at Kansas. Um, and I think they'll hang again this week. At home, UC's look good. This is kind of it for Scott Satterfield. They need a strong season for him to keep his job. So he is obviously motivated. The team's motivated. Give me the Bearcats.
Yeah, definitely the definition of a coin flip game reflected by that spread. I think, UC coming off of that win, like Dave said, on the road against Jalen Daniels and that Kansas team, they're riding a high right now, and they're going to come home and pull this game out.
I'm going to be the dissenting opinion on this one. I think Rocco Becht is able, as a veteran quarterback, to go in to Cincinnati and get a win. So I'm going to take Iowa State outright in the matchup. Next one on the board
Don't
is
sleep on Brendan Sorsby, man. Brendan Sorsby for UC.
Sorsby's been good. There's no denying anything can happen in the Big 12. There is no doubt about that.
Two strong veteran quarterbacks.
For sure. And one of the more underrated quarterback matchups of the year, we might add. Well, we'll go Texas at Florida. This was on the upset board. Again, the spread is 6.5 in favor of the Longhorns, the road team here. David, who do you like between these two teams?
I like the Longhorns. I don't know if I'm there yet, but I'm close to saying that 2025 Florida is 2024 Florida State. So I'm gonna take the Longhorns. I'm not there yet, but I'm getting there.
Yeah, I think Texas is just going to be too much for Florida. And at this point in the season, like Dave said, Florida is trending in such a bad direction that they are bad enough to be considered, that kind of team. So Texas is just going to be a little bit too much for Florida. And 6.5, I will definitely take.
This is like 3 weeks in a row I've had to pick against a team at home I don't like picking against at home. I did it with Utah 2 weeks ago. I did it with Georgia last week. I'm going to do it with Florida here. I don't love it. Not comfortable doing it, but I will take Texas to win and cover. I might have to do this again in the next pick because we get Miami at Florida State, and the Hurricanes are favored by 4.5. This game, my goodness gracious, it could go I think either way, that spread I don't love. There's not a lot I like about this game in terms of betting odds. But we've got Miami favored by 4.5 at Florida State. Doak Campbell Stadium is going to be alive and well at 7:30 on Saturday night. David, biggest game of the week. Who wins it?
I think Florida State. I think Florida State wins it, and this is a very conflicting pick for me. I really like what Miami's been doing, and I like what Florida State did against Alabama. Obviously, last week was a hiccup, but I think at home, I think they take this one. I think the crowd will be alive. This is going to be a huge game for Florida State, really for both programs, of course, but certainly for Florida State, and I think they get it.
Yeah, I think this is just too important of a game for Florida State, and this is a game that, you have to use as a tool to, propel this program into a direction that is the opposite of what last year was. And I think Florida State set up to get back on track. And, Miami, if they do lose this game, their season's not over. Obviously, they haven't lost any games, and they are that number 3 ranking. But this is a game where I think it'll just be too much.
Neither result here is going to shock me. And I did not have on the bingo card to have 3 Florida State picks. Here, I do like the Seminoles. David, you were talking about it last week with the Ohio State and Washington game, saying if Washington wins the game, it doesn't mean Ohio State's bad. It just means Washington's good. And if Ohio State wins the game, it still means that Washington can be good and Ohio State is good. I think the same logic applies to this game with Miami and Florida State. The winner is good, but somebody has to lose. And I think Florida State finds a way to win this game late. So I will take them plus 4.5 Saturday night. Final game out of the SEC is Vanderbilt at Alabama. The spread here, 10.5. So a little bit of a breather pick to end the show, even though it's still a ranked matchup. David, who do you like here?
Roll Tide. I'm taking Alabama this week. I think they have enough. Um, and good season for Vanderbilt. I still think they're strong. They could win 8, 9 games, but I think Alabama kind of gives them a reality check this week.
Yeah, I think Alabama has kind of ascended past Vandy. Obviously, last year was a whole different team, but I definitely take Alabama to win this game. But as far as the line goes, sitting at 10.5, I don't know if I'm super confident in Vandy not being able to cover 10.5 right now.
Grant, I do think that Vanderbilt can cover it, but I thought preseason Alabama was going to be really good. I was disproven a little bit in week 1. I'm believing again. My drink this morning was Crimson Tide Red. So I'm going to take Alabama, and I think they're going to win the game. And I'm with David. I think that they cover. And this game puts Alabama back firmly in the national conversation. Now, back-to-back weeks, I say that because last year they had the road woes. They couldn't get it done at Vanderbilt. They couldn't get it done at Oklahoma. And then they go and lose to Michigan in the bowl game. Then they lose to Florida State on the road. They just beat Georgia. So putting back-to-back games together against Georgia and against a ranked Vanderbilt team that is improved even from a year ago, I think this is the one for Kalen DeBoer where he's like, you know what, we've got to prove it here in this spot or we're going to get talked about like we were last year. This is a program game for Alabama. And I think for that reason, they win the game and they cover at home in front of Bryant-Denny Stadium. David, your final thoughts here, rounding out the pick segment and rounding out the show.
No, going into week 6 now, we're really in there. And Blake, as you always say, the games to remember are played in November, but I think we're going to get some games to remember in October this year, and I'm excited for it. I think we'll get a few this week, and obviously as the month goes on, we'll get some more great matchups, and looking forward to it.
No doubt about that. The slate next week is going to be really good. So we're going to have another great show for you on Thursday. But in between that, we've got the recap show that'll be to you on Monday. So again, coverage throughout the entire weekend. Make sure you guys are staying tuned to our socials, to the website, tsilverbulletin.com, at Saturday Cadence and at tsilverbulletin on social media. Guys, we appreciate you listening for today's show. Enjoy week 6 of the college football season. A lot of great games, and we'll see you on the Monday show. God bless.